Cy Young enters professional baseball in 1890, and over a 21-year span that ends in 1911, accumulates 511 career victories while delivering 7,356 innings and completing 749 games. His workload belongs to a period when pitchers operate as full route labor, because bullpen roles have not yet evolved into the modern layered system of setup arms, matchup specialists, and ninth-inning closers. Young frequently starts on 2 days rest, logs 300 to 400 innings in multiple seasons, and treats the act of finishing what he begins as a basic expectation rather than an accolade. The scoring environment of the dead ball era, characterized by low run production and fewer power threats, keeps pitch counts naturally lower, so managers rarely intervene. It is baseball before pitch tracking cameras, biomechanics labs, or injury prevention departments. His win total grows not because he dominates every night, but because the era structures the game so that a frontline pitcher is always present when the decision is recorded. As Major League Baseball enters the second half of the 20th century, the structural conditions that once enabled Young's accumulation begin to disappear. Organizations track fatigue more rigorously, limit workloads with pitch counts, and gradually remove the expectation that a starting pitcher should carry the ball into the ninth inning. By the 1,990 seconds, average innings for frontline starters fall under 230, and by the 2,020 seconds, they slip below 180, creating an environment where even elite pitchers rarely collect more than 15 or 16 wins per year, because contemporary rotations feature 5 starters, and because relievers now secure nearly half of all decisions. The path to 300 career wins, which used to serve as the traditional marker of longevity, narrows substantially. Only 4 pitchers have reached that threshold since 1990, and none appear close to the pace required to replicate Young's trajectory. This statistical contraction forms the foundation for why his record is widely viewed as unreachable. The widening gap between Young's era and modern pitching usage becomes most apparent when comparing complete games. Young's 749 completes dwarf contemporary norms, where many teams finish a season with 0 such outings and rely on their bullpens for a majority of late-inning leverage. Because complete games were the principal vehicle for collecting wins before formal relief roles existed, Young's accumulation reflects a structural alignment that no longer exists. Therefore, the record does not simply stand because Young was exceptional, it stands because the sport has reorganized itself around conservation, efficiency, and matchup optimization. Pitchers today may throw harder, track more spin, and generate higher strikeout rates, but they will never be asked or allowed to chase Young's volume. What has made this record so secure is the fact that modern baseball has eliminated the very conditions that made it possible. Rickey Henderson, an Oakland Athletics outfielder, active from 1979 through 2003, establishes a stolen base record that now functions as a statistical boundary rather than a realistic target. He finishes his career with 1,406 steals, leads the American League in the category 12 times, and produces a peak season in 1982 with 130 successful attempts. His success rate stays above 80% in multiple seasons because he studies pitchers' pickoff habits, records their timing to the plate, and widens his leads according to situation rather than guesswork. Managers in the 1,980 seconds authorize him to run freely because league offenses produce lower run-scoring totals and value incremental advancement. The green light is not occasional, it is institutional. Henderson thrives in an environment where speed serves as a reliable tactic rather than a luxury. As the sport transitions into the late 1,990 seconds and early 2000s, the offensive model shifts toward power, launch angle, and 3-run outcomes, reducing the incentive to attempt steals. Teams produce more home runs per game, so managers begin calculating that an unsuccessful steal erases more run expectancy than a successful attempt can create. Because analytics departments track break-even percentages and pitcher tendencies in greater detail, stolen base attempts fall sharply, and by the 2020 seconds, only a handful of players surpass 30 or 40 inches a season. Even the league leaders rarely reach 50, and nobody approaches Henderson's 80 to 100 attempt range, let alone the triple-digit totals he produced in his prime. The risk-averse environment therefore reduces both opportunities and managerial tolerance for volume running. Rule changes that expand bases and limit pickoff attempts increase league-wide steals after 2023, but the surge does not restore Henderson's conditions. Attempts rise, yet the distribution remains spread across many players, instead of concentrated in a singular, high-volume runner, receiving 130 green lights in a single year. Contemporary rosters prioritize power in corner positions, on-base skill in the middle, and defensive range up the middle, leaving little space for a specialist whose primary value derives from speed alone. Even the fastest modern runners rarely sustain elite sprint ability for more than a few seasons, whereas Henderson maintains peak efficiency for over 2 decades. Because the strategic landscape no longer rewards extreme aggression on the bases, Henderson's record widens into an immovable benchmark. What this says about the next great speed-driven player leads directly into the question of durability and opportunity that defines the Cal Ripken Jr. streak. Cal Ripken Jr., a Baltimore Orioles shortstop and later third baseman, establishes the longest consecutive game streak in Major League Baseball when he appears in 2,632 straight contests between the 30th of May 1982 and the 20th of September 1998. He plays through minor injuries, travel strain, and seasonal fatigue because the Orioles rely on his defensive durability and everyday availability during a period when teams rarely discuss scheduled rest. Ripken completes 16 full seasons without missing a game and averages more than 160 appearances per year across the streak, demonstrating a consistency that becomes increasingly rare as sports medicine evolves. Because lineup construction in the 1,980 seconds and early 1,990 seconds prioritizes rhythm and routine, managers hesitate to remove an elite two-way player once he is entrenched. The idea of an off day for a healthy star remains unusual across the league. Ripken's streak grows not from showmanship, but from a structural expectation that an everyday starter remains in the lineup unless physically unable to perform. By the late 1,990 seconds, and especially into the 2000s and 2010 seconds, franchises shift their priorities toward injury prevention and performance optimization, introducing load management protocols that schedule rest even for fully healthy players. Clubs invest in biomechanical tracking systems, medical staff expansion, and recovery-focused training factors that reduce the incentive to push athletes through minor discomfort. As a result, most modern position players sit out 10 to 20 games per season, and some rest even more frequently, depending on matchup data and travel cycles. The combination of sports science and long-term contract protection means that organizations now value preserving peak performance over maintaining unbroken streaks, creating conditions under which no player can even begin the kind of accumulation Ripken once achieved. Because usage decisions now integrate data rather than endurance, Ripken's streak transforms from a goal into an unattainable outlier. Modern roster strategies reinforce the divide by expanding benches and increasing platoon usage, which reduces the daily necessity for one player to occupy the same position for months without interruption. Utility infielders, defensive replacements, and left-right matchups appear in larger numbers, distributing workload across more players and shrinking the opportunity for any individual to replicate Ripken's marathon availability. Even historically durable stars players, who average 155 games per year, would require nearly 17 consecutive seasons without a single missed date to match his total. A timeline incompatible with current medical decision-making. Therefore, Ripken's record persists not only because of his resilience, but also because the league has reorganized itself around controlled rest, strategic rotation, and injury risk minimization. That shift toward structural limitation leads directly into the next benchmark, Joe DiMaggio's 56-game hitting streak, where daily variability rather than durability becomes the defining barrier. Joe DiMaggio, a New York Yankees center fielder and 3-time MVP, constructs Major League Baseball's most studied hitting record when he reaches base safely in 56 consecutive games during the summer of 1941. He bats .408 across the streak, records extra base hits in more than half of the contests, and avoids interruption even when teams modify defensive alignments specifically to limit his contact quality. The only moment that comes close to breaking the run occurs on August 2, when a scoring decision initially rules a difficult infield play an error rather than a hit, preserving the streak by the thinnest official margin. Because starting pitchers in the early 1,940 seconds regularly throw complete games, DiMaggio faces consistent timing patterns and fewer late-inning specialists, allowing him to construct daily adjustments against familiar deliveries. The rhythm of the era keeps his opportunities stable rather than fragmented. His performance unfolds inside a structure that offers more plate appearances per game and fewer matchup disruptions, enabling the streak's expansion. As pitching strategy evolves, the conditions that once supported DiMaggio's run erode. By the 1970s, managers deploy relievers more aggressively, and by 1978, even Pete Rose, who reaches 44 consecutive games, finds the gap between starters and relievers widening because velocity, handedness changes, and bullpen depth shorten hitting windows. Entering the 2000s and 2010 seconds, clubs rely on data-driven matchup decisions that remove starters after 2 trips through the order, introduce high-spin relievers with platoon advantages, and reduce predictable sequences. This environment forces hitters to adjust to multiple arm angles and pitch types within a single game, lowering the probability of maintaining a long consecutive hit sequence. Because modern analytics prioritize run prevention through specialization, hitters rarely build momentum through repeated looks at the same pitcher, making extended streaks statistically fragile. The influence of defensive optimization further constrains streak potential, as shifting patterns in targeted positioning reduce the number of soft or borderline hits that once prolonged similar runs. Current tracking systems identify batted ball tendencies with such precision that even well-struck balls may die in zones designed to neutralize them, eliminating the margin of error that DiMaggio occasionally received from fielding miscues or defensive misreads. Meanwhile, modern hitters face higher league average velocities, expanded breaking ball usage, and increasingly volatile daily lineups, all of which interrupt the consistency required to reach even 30 consecutive games. Because each of these structural features compounds the difficulty, DiMaggio's mark endures as an upper boundary rather than a reachable goal. That widening gap between historical context and modern conditions sets the stage for the next record, Barry Bonds' 7-3 home run season, where era-specific forces again define the ceiling. Barry Bonds, a San Francisco Giants left fielder and 7-time MVP, produces the highest single-season home run total in Major League Baseball history when he hit 73 inches, 2001. He pairs that total with 232 walks, 120 of them intentional, because opposing managers calculate that a free base carries less run expectancy than allowing him to swing. Bonds posts a 1.379 OPS, the highest qualified mark in the modern era, and records a home run once every 6.5 at-bats, a pace that compresses normal probability curves. Because strikeout rates in 2001 remain lower than today and defensive shifts are still in their early stages, many of his batted balls translate into extra base damage rather than turned over outs. The run-scoring environment of the early 2000s amplifies the value of each contact event. His season operates on the outer edge of what any hitter has produced before or since. The context surrounding that record, particularly performance-enhancing drugs and league-wide strength trends, continues to shape how analysts interpret its durability. Testing protocols strengthened significantly after 2004, and the league's power distribution changes as home run rates rise across entire rosters rather than concentrating around one extreme outlier. Meanwhile, pitchers generate more velocity, sharper breaking pitches, and higher strikeout percentages, reducing the number of hittable mistakes a batter sees in an entire month, let alone a full season. Relief units deepen as well, and the average team deploys specialized late-inning arms whose pitch shapes and scouting profiles are designed to neutralize power hitters. Because elite hitters now face more pitches per game, the consistency required to maintain a 73-homer pace becomes structurally unattainable. Managerial strategy further distances modern hitters from Bonds' opportunity profile. Teams apply defensive shifts with greater precision, and although post-2023 rules soften their most extreme formations, outfield positioning and pitch sequencing still reduce high-damage contact. Pitchers avoid challenging elite sluggers in the zone, and modern walk rates for stars therefore increase without providing the at-bat volume necessary to chase an extreme home run total. Even players who reach 50 or 60 inches recent seasons rely on peak health, favorable park factors, and sustained lineup protection conditions Bonds routinely exceeded. Because the gap between 60 and 73 home runs widens under modern tactics, his record transitions from unlikely to effectively unreachable. That separation between past and present leads directly into the next benchmark, Ted Williams' 406 season, where contact skill rather than power defines the ceiling. Ted Williams, a Boston Red Sox left fielder and 2-time MVP, records the last 400 batting average in Major League Baseball when he finishes the 1,941 season at 406. He reaches that mark only after refusing to protect a rounded up 3,995 average on the final day, instead choosing to play both halves of a September 28 doubleheader and going 6 for 8 to lock in the number. Across the year, Williams pairs elite plate discipline with contact quality that produces league-leading on-base and slugging percentages, giving him the volume needed to survive inevitable slumps. Because pitchers in 1941 worked deeper into games and rely less on high-velocity breaking pitches, Williams faces more repeat matchups and can calibrate his timing over multiple plate appearances. The structure of the schedule provides consistency rather than disruption. His 406 therefore emerges from both skill and an environment that permits extended in-season adjustment. Defenses begin responding to him almost immediately, and by the late 1,940 managers experiment with early shift formations designed to cut off his pull-side ground balls and line drives. Although the shift becomes a standard tactic decades later, its initial implementation signals how dramatically Williams' contact profile shaped strategy. Yet even with those experiments, league-wide conditions still support higher averages. Pitchers throw fewer breaking balls, velocity bands sit lower, and strikeout rates remain under 12%. As the league transitions into the 1,980 seconds, 1,990 seconds, and 2,000s, rising velocity and expanding arsenals alter the hitting landscape, making bat speed, pitch recognition, and timing exponentially more difficult. By 1948, no player again crosses 390, and by the 2010 seconds league batting averages fall below 255, eliminating the statistical space needed for a 400 chase. Modern baseball intensifies those challenges. Relievers now account for more than half of all innings in some seasons, and hitters often face 3 or 4 different arm angles within a single game, reducing their ability to build familiarity across at-bats. Defensive positioning becomes increasingly optimized through tracking data, absorbing many of the soft line drives or marginal grounders that once prolonged high average years. Meanwhile, organizational emphasis on power and lift increases strikeout totals, depressing batting averages, and shifting value towards slugging rather than contact. For a hitter to reach 400 today, he would need to combine elite contact ability with unprecedented batted ball luck and season-long health conditions no modern structure supports. That widening statistical gap leads directly to the next threshold, Walter Johnson's shutout total, where pitching volume, rather than hitting precision, defines the ceiling. Walter Johnson, a Washington Senators right-hander and 2-time MVP, records 110 career shutouts between 1,907 and 1,927, a total more than double the next closest pitcher in Major League Baseball history. His dominance develops inside the dead ball era, where run scoring stays low, contact quality remains modest, and pitchers routinely work complete games because bullpen roles are still informal. Johnson posts 4 separate seasons with at least 10 shutouts, a number that now exceeds the career totals of most modern all-star starters. Because early 20th century managers expect their aces to finish what they begin, Johnson frequently surpasses 300 innings in a season and maintains control deep into 9th innings without facing pre-planned relief patterns. The structure of the sport places longevity and volume at the center of pitcher value. His shutout total reflects an era in which a starting pitcher controls the entire offensive environment for the full duration of a game. As baseball evolves into the post-war years, strategic priorities shift toward injury prevention and matchup exploitation. Organizations introduce 5-man rotations, track fatigue more precisely, and identify that pitcher effectiveness declines on third trips through the order, prompting managers to remove starters as early as the 6th inning. Meanwhile, bullpen specialization accelerates in the 1,980 seconds and 1,990 seconds, producing dedicated setup arms and closers whose job is to neutralize late-inning scoring threats. Because those relievers often feature higher velocity and sharper breaking pitches than the starters they replace, the incentive to leave a fatigued pitcher on the mound diminishes rapidly. These usage patterns reduce the number of complete games to single digits league-wide, shrinking shutout opportunities to the point where most teams record 0 in a typical season. The strategic environment of the 2010 seconds and 2020 seconds widens that gap even further. Clubs emphasize pitch count ceilings, third time through the order penalties, and data-driven bullpen sequencing that distributes leverage across multiple arms. Therefore, a modern starter rarely faces the final 3 outs required to preserve a shutout. Even elite workhorses, pitchers who surpass 200 innings in a healthy year, collect 1 or 2 career shutouts at most, and many accumulate none at all, despite Cy Young caliber performance. Because Johnson's total depends on repeated 9-inning workloads that no modern organization would authorize, his 110 shutouts stand as a measurement not only of skill, but of a structural framework the sport no longer supports. That divergence between eras leads directly into the next record, Hugh Duffy's 440 batting average, where offensive conditions again illustrate how dramatically the game's context has transformed. Hugh Duffy, a Boston Beaneaters outfielder and future Hall of Famer, records a 440 batting average in 1894, the highest single-season mark in Major League Baseball history. His performance unfolds during an extreme high offense environment created by rule changes that moved the pitcher's mound to 60 feet 6 inches and reduced the tactical advantage pitchers previously held. League batting averages climbed to 309 that season, and several hitters surpass 350, because defensive positioning remains rudimentary and field conditions vary dramatically from park to park. Duffy benefits from expanded foul ball rules and limited strikeout pressure, allowing more batted balls to remain in play and raise his statistical ceiling. The combination of rule shifts and offensive inflation produces an environment unlike any that follows. His 440, therefore, reflects both personal skill and structural conditions that no modern season replicates. As baseball standardizes field dimensions, introduces higher quality equipment, and strengthens competitive balance across clubs, the opportunity for an outlier average diminishes. Pitchers adopt more varied arsenals, defensive alignments improve, and travel schedules diversify enough to reduce the park-specific quirks that once inflated individual performance. Even during the peak of the steroid era, when power totals surge and offensive output spikes, no hitter approaches a 390 season, illustrating how distant Duffy's mark has become from contemporary hitting realities. Meanwhile, the rising importance of on-base and slugging percentages pushes hitters towards selective aggression, lowering batting average ceilings even for elite contact specialists. Because modern hitters must navigate increased velocity and sharper breaking pitches, sustaining a month-long run, let alone a full season at 400 plus, becomes statistically impossible. The rare conditions that enable Duffy's surge therefore remain locked within a narrow historical window rather than a repeatable formula. Modern parity spreads talent across rosters, reducing the mismatch-driven stat lines common in the 1,890 seconds, and improved defensive efficiency absorbs many of the weakly hit balls that once boosted high averages. With league strikeout rates consistently above 20% and pitching usage increasingly optimized through bullpen matchups, the probability of assembling a 440 season collapses to near zero. The combination of environment, strategy, and structural evolution reclassifies Duffy's record as a statistical glitch, preserved by a style of play that no longer exists. That shift from offensive inflation to modern constraint sets up the next unbreakable achievement, Nolan Ryan's strikeout and no-hitter totals, where workload and velocity trends diverge even more dramatically. Nolan Ryan, a right-hander who pitches for 27 seasons between 1,966 and 1,993, produces two records that anchor the statistical upper limits of modern pitching: 5,714 career strikeouts and 7 no-hitters. His strikeout total develops because he routinely throws 100 miles per hour well into his 40s and maintains elite durability through workloads that exceed 250 innings multiple times. Ryan averages more than a strikeout per inning during an era when league-wide whiff rates remain far lower, allowing his raw volume to accumulate without modern competition. His no-hitters span from 1,973 to 1,991, covering different teams, ballparks, and offensive environments, which underscores how his velocity-driven approach translates across eras with minimal decline. The longevity of his arsenal functions as the backbone of both records. He benefits from a period when managers permit high pitch counts, extended outings, and prolonged battles deep into ninth innings. As baseball enters the 1,990 seconds and 2000s, organizational priorities begin shifting toward controlled workloads and injury prevention, which directly reduces the pathways to Ryan's totals. Starters who once logged 120 pitches without hesitation now operate under strict caps, often exiting games after 9,100 to avoid fatigue-based declines. Because rotations expand to 5 pitchers in clubs, strictly managed innings for younger arms, even elite strikeout specialists rarely surpass 200 innings in back-to-back seasons. This structural limitation sharply restricts strikeout volume, making Ryan's cumulative 5,714 more a reflection of repeated opportunity than isolated dominance. Meanwhile, the rise of bullpen specialization further reduces late-game exposure, removing the conditions needed for no-hitters built on complete game endurance. Modern tactical environments widen the gap even more. Relievers now enter games earlier and feature higher velocity and sharper pitch shapes, distributing strikeouts across entire staffs rather than concentrating them in one long-tenured starter. Analytics departments emphasize third-time-through-the-order penalties, prompting managers to pull pitchers before they face a lineup a fourth time, the exact scenario in which many of Ryan's no-hitters reached their decisive final outs. Even if a pitcher displays elite swing and miss ability or flirts with no-hit bids, organizational priorities override the chase for historical milestones, cutting short outings that once would have continued. Because Ryan's records require both longevity and managerial tolerance, they remain unattainable under current usage patterns. That divergence leads naturally into the next unbreakable landmark, Sam Crawford's triples record, where changing ballpark dimensions reshape statistical ceilings from another angle. Sam Crawford, a Detroit Tigers outfielder active from 1,899 to 1,917, establishes Major League Baseball's all-time triples record with 309, a total driven by the structural geometry of dead ball era parks rather than a repeatable style of hitting. Many outfields in that period stretch beyond 430 or even 450 feet in center field, creating expansive gaps where balls can roll unchecked once they pass the last defender. Because teams play without uniform wall dimensions and rely on slower, less specialized outfielders, Crawford routinely converts hardline drives into three-base hits instead of doubles. The offensive environment also favors contact-heavy swings and low home run totals, meaning triples function as a primary form of power production rather than an occasional bonus. Speed and ballpark design merge into a statistical opportunity modern hitters cannot replicate. Crawford's total reflects a landscape where triples hold everyday strategic relevance. As baseball transitions into the mid-20th century, stadium construction becomes standardized and outfield dimensions tighten, reducing the available real estate required for triple-friendly trajectories. Parks adopt symmetrical layouts, uniform wall heights, and shorter power alleys that turn many of Crawford's historical triples into modern home runs or doubles. Meanwhile, defensive efficiency climbs through better conditioning, improved field surfaces, and deeper scouting reports, shrinking the number of balls that escape coverage long enough to produce three bases. At the plate, hitters adjust to evolving strategies that emphasize slugging percentage and launch angle, shifting offensive value toward over-the-fence outcomes rather than aggressive base running. Because clubs increasingly prioritize home run power, the incentive for players to pursue triples declines sharply. Contemporary conditions narrow the path to large triple totals even further. Modern sluggers, who routinely exceed 25 or 30 home runs, rarely attempt the high-risk, high-exertion base running required to stretch deep hits into triples, especially when injury prevention protocols guide organizational decisions. Only a handful of players in recent years reach double-digit triples in a single season, and league leaders often finish with totals in the low teens numbers that illustrate how far the statistical landscape has drifted from Crawford's era. With stadiums uniformly smaller, outfields more efficient, and offensive philosophy tilted toward controlled power, Crawford's 309 triples remain untouched and unapproachable. This shift from expansive 1900s ballparks to modern constraints provides a natural bridge into the next unbreakable mark, Pete Rose's chase for 4,256 hits, where volume rather than environment defines the barrier.